Okay, I think we'll go ahead and dive in to orders from anywhere. Can we confirm that folks on remote folks can see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Beautiful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone both in the room, which we have a good crowd, and also virtually on the phone, spread across the world, to orders from anywhere. Today, we're going to discuss billing, order processing, and automation. We've got our esteemed partners, Argano, in the room with us, and they've done quite a bit with orders and orders from anywhere, B2C, direct sales, wherever they may come from. And they're going to show us some of the ways in which they've injected automation and made this process just easier and more scalable for the customers that they work with. So we want to do some introductions first, and then that's going to be our topic for the next hour. So I think on our next slide, we've got a couple of introductions to do. I'll kick it off here as the host of our day today. So I'm David Beebe, so I have the pleasure of leading the solution engineers, the Revenue Cloud solution engineers for North America. And while historically Revenue Cloud has meant CPQ and billing, and largely still does, Revenue Cloud is certainly expanding into the world of subscription management, contracts, industry clouds like media or manufacturing, and it is an area of the business that Salesforce is investing in heavily. And so topics like these are exciting because we can take something like billing and we can show how it can be magnified, how it can be changed, modified, and put into use at all of our different customers. So with that, Sean, would you like to just my Salesforce buddy? Want to go next?
Hey everyone, Sean Joseph. I am a distinguished solution engineer focused on our billing product. Been with Salesforce for about 4 years. Before that, I was at Financial Force for 6.5 years. So when you add it all up, I have over a decade experience working with back office solutions here on Force.com platform.
Great, excellent. I'll go next. Hi guys, I'm Derek Quinn. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for our Salesforce practice at Argano. I've been in the Salesforce space for a record amount of time, 23 years and counting. So really since the beginning of Salesforce. The interesting thing is my entire career has really been focused around revenue operations, sales operations. So I cut my teeth in quote to cash, kind of going back earlier in my career at Deloitte, where I spent a good portion of my time doing very large quote to cash transformations, starting off with the early days of CPQ, doing big machines projects, eventually went and did Aptus. And then towards the end of my time at Deloitte, built up this Salesforce CPQ and billing practice, Steelbrick at the time. So really, this is my passion. This is the space that I love, and I'm excited to be here today. Blake?
Yep. Hey, everyone. Blake Williams, Program Architect with Argano, and lead our Client Solutions Group in our Salesforce practice. We essentially provide solution and thought leadership across the practice, focused on our larger enterprise programs. These are solutions that have a lot of moving parts, heavier architecture and design choices, right, to be made on platform. I joined our firm back in 2006, so not quite the tenure of Derek, but who does? But have spent the majority of the last 17 years focused on the delivery of CRM, CPQ, and quote-to-cash solutions. So especially lately, last 6-7 years, really focused on working with our clients early stage in our define and design phases to define the overall solution on Salesforce. So have dealt with a number of the use cases we'll be talking about today. So looking forward to the discussion.
And hi, everybody. I'm Angela Colston. I'm a Senior Director of Pre-Sales at Argano. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for a little over 18 years across all core clouds, including CPQ, field service, and then also B2B. So I'm based out of Dallas, and I've joined Argano. I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary, so I'm really happy to be here and meet everybody here.
Congratulations.
Great. Thanks, Angela. Good afternoon, everybody. David Janke here, also a Senior Director Pre-Sales, and I've been on the Salesforce platform about 15 years or so. My first half on the client side as a Salesforce product owner, and then the second half on the implementation side. And I still remember my very first project 15 years ago, we're going to build a homegrown quoting tool. And so I've had CPQ experience for many, many years on homegrown tools, Aptus, but primarily, of course, SteelBreak. So definitely look forward to our call today. And I want to hand it back over to Derek just to talk a little bit more about Argano.
Sounds great. So a little bit about Argano. I'll hit a few slides, talk a bit about our Salesforce practice, and then we'll kind of dig right into the meat and potatoes of the call today. So a little bit about Argano. So think of this as a management consulting firm. We've grown heavily through acquisitions. So I actually, Blake, myself came in to Argano through an acquisition of a company called Amind, which was a boutique consulting firm focused on quote to cash. So when you think of Argano, think a management consulting firm. We're growing very rapidly. Think global, right? So we've got a global footprint, got delivery centers across the world. And the value proposition to our customers, right, is obviously that global reach, being able to bring in the right resources, obviously gives us a lot of leverage on rates so we can be competitive with our competitors in the marketplace. Lots of great certifications, lots of partner awards, lots of experience. You'll see that high net promoter score there. I think one of the things that is a good testament to how we work, right? We're 100% focused on helping our customers through these complex transformations. And anybody on the phone knows anything about Revenue Cloud or quote to cash knows that those transformations can be complicated. Next slide. So a little double clicking into the Salesforce practice. This is probably a little out of date, but to give you a little summary of our Salesforce practice, high CSAT score. Again, kind of you'll see at the bottom there when I talk about, right size teams and a laser focus on customer success. This has really sort of been our focus. We don't try to go in and, paint the picture and then come in and land a team and then suddenly discover that it's going to be something else. We're very focused on helping our customers through these journeys. 100% focused on customer success, which is why we have a very high CSAT score. Today, the topic is largely around Revenue Cloud, but you can see lots of Revenue Cloud certifications, lots of completed Revenue Cloud projects. We do a lot of billing, which we're going to talk a bit about today, obviously is a big theme of orders from anywhere. I'd say kind of at the bottom, they're hitting a few things that I think highlight what differentiates us and the partner ecosystem is really a few of them, right? Right project teams. I come from big consulting, management consulting firms, right? Where we come in, bring giant teams for the sake of bringing in giant teams. I think one thing that separates us and how we approach our projects is we bring in the right size team. We spend the due diligence in pre-sales. We try to understand really what the customer is trying to do. And we bring in the right team to solve that problem. We don't try to bring in more than we need to get the work done. The other thing I'd say on the far right there is solving problems other partners can't. That can sound scary if you look at that, but really what that's saying is that we get brought in oftentimes through Salesforce to really solve complex problems with Revenue Cloud. And so thinking of things like orders from anywhere, how do you leverage the billing platform in maybe a non-traditional way to solve a business problem? That's where we shine. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. And
Next
let me
slide.
ask you a question.
Yeah.
And this is meant to be interactive, not only for folks here in the room, but on the phone as well. So if you have questions, raise your hand or just speak up. I think part of the reason today came together was because of that bottom right-hand corner, which was solve problems that others can't. Order management is an incredibly complex topic.
It is.
And so I just wanted to kind of call out that bottom right-hand panel is sort of what led to today of like, oh, okay, what could be interesting to discuss? The 45 Revenue Cloud projects, you said this, but does it skew more towards billing, an equal mix of CPQ and billing?
I'd say it's a bit of both. CPQ, if anyone knows CPQ, a lot of customers have CPQs, just like they have CRMs. We've seen a pretty huge pivot to billing, right? We've seen a lot of use cases, especially in the subscription SaaS space. Billing is a pretty common theme to be able to have a system to invoice and receive revenue for those things. I'd say we're pivoting more towards billing. I'd say we're seeing more billing projects than we've traditionally seen in the past. Yeah.
Great.
Talking about our Salesforce expertise, you'll see sales, service, revenue, commerce. Today, we're really talking about revenue operations. You'll see that we didn't see it so much in the other slide I kind of hit, but really MuleSoft data. Data is a huge part of every one of these quote to cash transformations. You're moving data from Salesforce, you're moving it to a back office system like ERP. And so, integrations is a core part of almost every one of these transformations. So we have a very large MuleSoft practice, lots of experience working with APIs. Again, it'll be a theme of orders from anywhere. How do you take orders from anywhere? MuleSoft API type platforms are a great way to do that. You also see Tableau, right? Visualizations is a huge part of what our customers are trying to achieve. Almost every one of these transformations, customers have KPIs, measures, benchmarks they're trying to hit. And so they're collecting all this data in Salesforce, but how do you visualize that data? How do you make great, smart decisions? How do you optimize your business to take advantage of the data you're collecting? So you'll obviously see at the bottom too, like a lot of full service management consulting firms, we do advisory services, implementations, remediations, a big part of what we do as well. Lots of early adopters of CPQ out there that have grown through acquisitions or outgrown their CPQ implementations. We do a lot of work helping customers optimize and remediate there's existing CPQ implementation. Obviously, like I hit data and analytics and integration strategy as well. How do you make the decision? How do you figure out the right combination of clouds and pieces to solve the problem? We do a lot of that work as well. And then last slide, kind of double clicking into the services. You'll see a lot of things you see in a traditional management consulting firm. Obviously, we do change management, we do training, we'll do the business value guidance, which is really kind of digging into those KPIs and measures, as I mentioned, figuring out how are you going to measure success when this implementation is done. Business assessment, solution design and development, data visualization, like I mentioned, integrations, data cleansing. Data cleansing is a huge part of this. A lot of these implementations require migrating data from a legacy system into Salesforce. And it's not trivial sometimes to do those data migrations. So billing is a great example of that, right? When customers have an existing billing platform or they're doing invoicing out of ERP and they're going to move that into a subscription billing platform, data migration is usually a big part of that project because we've got to get those active subscriptions into Salesforce so we can bill for those. And then the last one there is post-production managed services. So, these are oftentimes what we see as customers when we go in and do a CPQ or billing implementation. They're not ready to take over these solutions. They want to continue to optimize and innovate on the platform. And so we provide managed services usually at the very end of those programs to kind of help the customer take over as they start to bring managing that solution in-house. So any questions?
I've got one about the managed services. Do you see, I've heard that this is a growing business for many of the partners in the ecosystem. It's becoming a bigger and bigger part of their revenue. Do you see a lot of this for customers that you take live and then continue the managed services with them?
Yeah.
Or is this more of a remediation? They already have it. They want to
It could be a bit of
get
both.
right.
It could be a bit of both. What we've found, and I think this holds true, Revenue Cloud expertise, customers struggle sometimes to get that expertise in-house. CPQ, billing is complicated to find those resources. So even when we press customers early on in the program to start to identify the champions and start to figure out who's going to take this over when we're done, oftentimes customers struggle to find the resources outside to come in and do this. So we see a lot of the managed services at the end of a program that we implement, but there's often times too at the end of a remediation scenario too, where we've come in and cleaned it up and fixed it, and then they want to keep some resources around to continue to optimize and improve the platform. So it's usually more, what I'd say more, continuous delivery managed services versus the traditional help desk, tier 1 support type managed services.
To your point, Revenue Cloud enjoys one of the lower attrition percentages here at Salesforce. Once customers buy it,
Sticky.
for better or worse, they don't want to get rid of it.
Right.
And so that's the I can see some managed services coming in and playing a big role there.
All right, good question. Thank you very much, Derek. Want to talk a little bit more about our agenda. So we've done who's who, right? We've learned about Argano, and we've met from our host and the panel. In just a minute, I'm going to turn it back over to David Beebe, and he'll tell us a little bit more about orders from anywhere. What do we really mean by that? What's the context? And also anywhere to kind of talk through exactly what we mean by that. Then we're going to hear from Blake Williams. We're going to hand it over to Blake, and he's going to walk us through some of the really complex billing and order automation use cases he's tackled over the years. We're going to have a Q&A session with the panel to talk through a lot of the different questions that we're seeing out there on the product side and also on the implementation side. And then probably the best part, we want to have 10 minutes of Q&A. All these great questions that you guys have in the audience, we want to hear from you. All right, so that is our agenda for the next 45 minutes or so. And I will hand it over to David Beebe now.
Yeah. So when we think about orders from anywhere, which of course is the title of our day today, but also just kind of conceptually what we're here to discuss, it's think about Salesforce's billing engine as being able to process orders from a number of different areas. We were chatting about this earlier today, whether it's a B2C order from an order management system, a website, wherever it's coming from. Billing essentially functions as this agnostic platform to say, we don't care where the order comes from. We want to take that information and we want to pass it through the channels. And we need to have the foundational building blocks of what makes that order, what makes it billable, and all the different components that go along with that, so that we can essentially put that information together and pass the baton, if you will, to the next person in the relay race, the next person, the next system, depending on the level of automation that a customer has. And so that's effectively what orders from anywhere are, right? Now, for Revenue Cloud customers, oftentimes those orders come from CPQ, especially in the world of direct sales. But in a world where there's more and more kind of touchless sales cycles from a website, from a B2C container, orders from anywhere is a critical data point, and it's something that's worth investigating. So Blake, I think you have a couple of interesting use cases to take us through in the world of orders from anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. Yeah, so let's spend some time talking about some of these. What I'm going to talk about is to start with usage billing. I think it's a good one to baseline on, in that solving for that consumption component of subscription billing that we see a lot in high tech and specifically SaaS is more and more common to get the consolidated recurring billing right. So we'll start there. And then I also want to talk about this concept of transactions, not subscriptions. I'll explain the need and the scenarios as it applies specifically to transportation and logistics, and specifically the storage, receiving, handling, and transportation of physical goods. So we'll spend some time on that as well. And then I also want to talk about exception-driven sales and this notion of subscription volatility. In that, right, from a business perspective, right, David talked about direct sales going through CPQ. And I think we all have a good baseline understanding of that use case and how it maps to subscription billing, right, on platform and all the benefits you get from that direct tie between CPQ and billing. Now, there's some going back to sort of the premise, right, of sort of some creative thinking and solutions needed for some of these non-standard models where the business process is not a straightforward fit to a subscription model and subscription and usage billing. So we'll talk about that one as well. So let's talk about usage billing, right? So a common pattern that we see need to be solved for is consolidated recurring billing for both core application services and variable use services. And we're seeing a particular focus on, call it the monetization of those variable use services, where we've solved for on Salesforce and often include scenarios that challenge other billing applications. So for example, right, common use cases, minimum commitment, also referred to as commitment with overage, where a sales rep determines a minimum usage spend per billing period and invoice at the time of quoting. Another common pattern that we see is this notion of prepaid cloud credits. So this could be a prepaid quantity or a prepaid amount, but where that prepaid wallet, if you will, or set of credits and tokens are paid up front and applied to usage on the back end until that prepaid quantity or amount is exceeded. And then, right, there's a decision on billing for the threshold, as well as kicking off, say, a sales motion to upgrade the customer or to allow the customer to self-service the purchase of additional credits, right? So there's this notion of that credit balance management and utilization or drawdown management of what they've prepaid for and getting the consolidated recurring billing right against that, as well as kicking off what needs to happen as part of that, either through a sales motion to upgrade or through, of course, what's becoming an increasing focus is to allow the customer to self-service, right, the management of their cloud credits and to ultimately buy more, right? Another common use case with usage is the notion of a high watermark, right? So to manage the maximum concurrent use over a period of time and to, again, write the theme to get that right in the automated consolidated recurring billing, right? So tying that back to both the core application services, you can think about that as the subscription or the core services or what they're committed to, along with the variable use services, again, where that's calculated and rated according to kind of the models I summarized and described above. So I'd say just rounding all that out, that is an important aspect to that we're seeing crop up a lot in high tech and especially SaaS. And where, right, the power of the platform, in our experience, is solving for those use cases as well as incorporating the right amount of process and tooling for things like discretionary approvals and overrides on top of the recurring billing process. So for instance, to be able to approve and override the credit balance management as part of the system process to ultimately feed the invoice scheduler and recurring billing system. So let me just take a pause there. Again, hopefully you don't have a picture, I realize may have been nice, but hopefully the concept's resonating before going to transactions and subscriptions. Any questions or feedback on that pattern and what we're seeing? Excellent. Take silence as understanding, and we'll drive forward. Let's talk about transactions and not just subscriptions. So we talked about this. We see this in transportation and logistics, and specifically the storage, receiving, handling, and transportation of physical goods. So these could be things like chemicals and engineered products that are manufactured and sold as inputs to a larger supply chain. This also applies to food service broadly and cold storage warehousing for food storage specifically. So in these scenarios, what we see is again, going back to billing, the recurring consolidated invoicing of two very different quoting cycles needs solving for. So one, call it more traditional work order quoting. So this side of the business involves one-off smaller deals for finite work items. So it's like, hey, in a warehouse, I want you to combine these 6 pallets onto 2, shrink wrap it for shipment, and that all has to get charged for, rated, approved, because the customer may not agree to those things and ultimately invoiced. So that's, you can think of as, hey, a work order turns into an invoice. Again, may not be a CPQ sales order or what we traditionally think as a CPQ sales order needing to be billed for, but it's work that has to get captured and billed for nonetheless. And then the other really interesting pattern that we've seen is this idea of contract negotiation. So what happens is a set of rates with an annual review against some expected types of services. So items being stored, inventory turns, expected services happening in the warehouse, such as receiving a pallet, additional warehouse services, shipping inspection, so on and so forth. So you can think of all of that set of services getting negotiated through a contract and set of rates. And where the challenge is the very prominent and important need for a large number of small invoices, where in transportation and logistics, that's just the industry norm and a company policy to aggregate and rate and sometimes bill daily and weekly for all of these different things happening in the warehouse across shipping, receiving, storage, and transportation, right, against a set of negotiated rates. So again, tying it back to a non-traditional use of the tool, CPQ, of course, is a great fit to handle the pricing and contract negotiation and ultimately the execution of that. But then you can think of there's daylight needed between that process and the ultimate invoicing and billing of what happens in the warehouse at a very high volume across a number of different activities that ultimately need to get captured in the warehouse and fed to billing. So just tying that together, right? A single customer would get invoices generated daily for each delivery, right? Covering handling, the accessorial charges, right? Shrink wrapping for that delivery, where like it's a very common industry pattern to tie invoices one-to-one to shipments, again, issued at the end of each day. Unexpected accessorial charges happening in the warehouse. So this is something happened that the customer didn't ask for, but they need to be charged for, right? A broken pallet, fallen or broken containers, documenting destroyed items, right? So there's ultimately often multiple charges that happen as part of this, both administrative and work charges that also need to be reviewed and approved with overrides where needed, given the customer doesn't expect them, but the clients often want to pass these costs on to the customer. And so there's a process and mechanism, right, needed in place to ultimately do that and to feed billing. And then I'd say the third one that we talked about is this invoice for each work order, right? One invoice per work order where the customer stores boxes of different types of food in bulk. They want a few pallets for shipment prepared with different types of food, shrink wrapped, and the customer will prepare all that stuff and will invoice the customer one-to-one for a work order, right? So again, tying that together, I think the themes here, one is what gets sold and captured in CPQ doesn't directly just become a sales order that you can tie the recurring billing into, right? There's a set of processes in the field, in this case, warehouses, or across multiple warehouses, that ultimately have to get captured, rated, and billed for in a very high volume fashion, right? Daily, weekly, ad hoc. And then I think the other piece here that we've seen is, right, in these high volume scenarios, right, other billing applications tend to fall down in this term of pre-rated usage as well, where the use of orders from anywhere, and specifically Salesforce multi-cloud billing, provides the flexibility of architecture and the daylight between your sales channels, right? Direct sales CPQ, or what's happening in the field to ultimately feed the recurring billing.
One thing I would add to what Blake was saying, kind of very in there, right, about the field. So you could think about that use case can apply to a lot of different scenarios. Think of a field service use case where you have maybe contracted arrangement that you're going to provide services to your customer in the field. They've got equipment in a warehouse or equipment in a hospital system, let's say. Maybe it's med device, for example, right? And that equipment is going to have repairs. It's going to have consumables. There's going to be things that happen in the field that don't necessarily reflect what that maintenance agreement or what that initial agreement said. So you could think of it like, in that particular scenario, you've got a contract or something that says, here's the different rates, the different things that I can charge you for, but it's what actually happens in the field can be a completely different scenario. And so at the end of the day, when that technician shows up to repair that medical device in the field, he or she's going to show up and determine, like Blake said, the work order is going to drive what actually happened, right? But I've got to be able in the field to be able to transact for that and invoice for that and collect money for that transaction. So you could see that theme applying to a lot of use cases. I could see it applying to a contact center use case where you've got lots of inbound things, right? You may have an arrangement of how you're going to support your customer, right? But what really happens when they engage you through a contact center environment could then spawn all these other things that happen that you still need to make changes, make adjustments, and get paid for. So.
Yep. Yeah, that's great context. And I think that's a really good segue. I'll just spend another minute or two on that last pattern here that we see. And this is around exception-driven sales, or really subscription volatility. So Derek was talking about where what happens on the street or in the field often doesn't match what was sold. And the system needs to align the billing to what's actually right on the street, in the field, and need to handle that at scale. The reality that what was sold may not match what ends up getting delivered, right? So this is, think about equipments and units that need to be delivered to multiple locations in the field with service provided to those units. where different types of units could be delivered versus what was sold for various reasons. Delays in providing those services, short quantities, extra quantities, and where the theme here is that customers will forgive these deviations provided they aren't overcharged or charged for what they didn't get. And where charging for more than delivered, or I don't understand my bill, or it's wrong, or I'm being overcharged, as we all know, drives a ton of customer dissat and calls to the call center and credits and refunds and just a whole lot of operational inefficiency along with customer dissatisfaction. So it's this concept of high volatility of changes against what was sold with lots of little changes captured in the field that don't map to, again, what you'd consider like traditional direct sales CPQ initiated upgrade and renewal cycles, right? This isn't like, hey, I sell this equipment on a 3-year term, I use it. At the end of that 3 years, I have a sales motion to start a renewal to figure out what they want to do with it. And I do a swap or maybe an uplift or an upgrade. It's not that, right? It's something gets sold. There could be, right, partial fulfillment delivery. I ended up delivering 6 units instead of 4 and a deluxe instead of a standard. And that has to get sorted out and ultimately align the recurring billing with what happened with lots of changes along the way, right? I want more units. I want to move units around, which the customer may get charged for, which may also have tax implications depending on the length of the move, right? I want to pause service. I want to push my end date out. I want to exchange one type of equipment for another type, and so on and so forth. So again, just wrapping that up, it's the idea of high volatility that doesn't map to what you think of as traditional CPQ subscription cycles, that you just sort of set it and forget it and let the recurring billing happen. And so the notion of having to capture those changes in the field and reflect those in the recurring billing.
And I
You
think,
want to take a pause? Yeah, please.
yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, again, you're probably saying the themes, right? All those different things that Blake's describing are events that at the end of the day, all you have to do is tell billing to do something, right? So think of orders, changes, all the different things that happen. At the end of the day, all you're doing is telling Salesforce Billing to go do something. You need to invoice for this, right?
Yes.
It kind of, again, picks up on the theme. If you look at all these different scenarios, right? The common use case potentially here, right, is this concept of an order, right? Something somewhere is happening or occurring. That's a transaction, aka order. And then as long as we can find the way to get that to Salesforce the way it needs, billing can pick it up and do something.
Yeah, and where Salesforce multi-cloud billing specifically provides that flexibility in the architecture for accommodating this type of volatility, to ultimately align the recurring billing with the ground reality. Again, could be coming from field service work orders, could be coming from an external warehouse management system that is sending charges somewhere to get aggregated, mediated, and ultimately rated. It could be coming from an external channel, right? So it's that notion of multi-cloud billing providing the daylight between your external channels and ultimately your consolidated invoicing system, that where a lot of other billing tools we see fall down. Of like, if you just look at an ERP subscription billing tool, it really just always wants to bill from the subscriptions, which again works great in call it standard traditional models, but it's these models where we see that breakdown where you need more flexibility in the architecture and tool.
Oh, Paul O'Malley.
Just a question, when you think of pricing that order for that event, pricing the products, pricing the service or the event that happens, you know, are you considering then a pricing engine that might be helpful to do that, or a pricing service?
Yeah, oftentimes, like in the case of transportation and logistics in this contract use case, in that the pricing, i.e. the rates, are set and defined upfront, and they're using CPQ to do that for a set of warehouse services and storage and so on and so forth. And so the pricing is defined and used to ultimately rate the charges that come in that need to be billed for.
Thank you.
Although picking up on Paul's question there, though, it's an interesting one, right? Because you could there is a potential scenario, and I've seen it, or I potentially could see it in logistics customers, for example, where to Blake's point, there is a contracted price and rate that's established up front, but maybe in the future, a logistics or supply chain company may want to have flexibility, and that contract might be loose. And it might be a scenario where they do want dynamic pricing or pricing optimization as an option to be able to dynamically control what goes on the invoice with outside factors. For example, labor rates or cost of fuel or all kinds of outside factors. I can see a scenario where that could also fit in a billing scenario too, where you're plugging a pricing engine or pricing optimization engine that's telling you what you really should be charging based on today and feeding that into that process for the billing.
One thing I've been just thinking about while you're walking through this, Blake. First off, I like providing the daylight. Okay, I think I'm gonna start using that in my own presentations as well. I'm gonna steal that. You answered this a little bit earlier on in terms of invoices and tying them one-to-one with shipments, for examples, or work orders. What are some of the other scenarios where you see invoice strategy come to light? So you got orders from anywhere coming all over the place. What invoice strategy are a lot of your customers employing? Is it we're gonna consolidate invoices for a shipment, like you mentioned earlier, or for individual work orders? Are there best practices that you have seen to say this is how invoice aggregation typically works? I know the answer is probably it depends, but any sort of lessons learned?
Yeah, lessons learned. So generally, the pattern and strategy that most customers are going for is consolidation. So going back to usage billing and high tech and SaaS, there's a high need and desire to provide consolidated invoice across both, call it core application services and all my variable use. And being able to consolidate that and deliver it to the customer as one consolidated invoice. That is, I'd say, just generally speaking, the most prevalent need that we see, and where I think that maps really well to what Salesforce Billing wants to do out of the box through an invoicing engine and consolidate, call it billable events across multiple orders, and put that onto one invoice, right? That can be ultimately presented to the customer and paid. That's, I'd say, the most prevalent pattern that we see. What's interesting about transportation and logistics is that is a little bit different, right? In that they want lots of distinct invoices that map to their industry patterns and norms of like, hey, something got shipped and I send an invoice for that. I did a work order to provide some services in the warehouse that all got approved, and I provide an invoice for that. And so where the customer would separately be invoiced for all of those things, along with a separate weekly recurring invoice for all the storage anniversaries that occurred that week, right? Because they get invoiced separately for storage. So they're paying storage charges every 15 days based on some fraction of their stored pallets, so on and so forth, and then getting more of what you think of as traditional invoices as well. I'd say that's a little bit different in that it's really an industry norm for transportation and logistics. So, no, David, does that help expand kind of what we've seen? Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I can give you like a real example, not naming the client, but Sean knows the client, but there's a specific customer I can think of where this would like describe the consolidated invoicing thing is a real challenge, right? So they're in this space, they do cold storage. Think of Costco, think of an Amazon, right? That might leverage one or many cold storage locations or warehouses across the country, right? And that customer doesn't want to get, if they're consuming transactions in 5 warehouses, they don't want to get 5 invoices, right? And they may want the flexibility of getting 5 invoices, but they want to roll up potentially to 1 invoice, right? And I think it also gets to Blake's point, the other challenge we see just in general with invoicing strategy, to your point, David, is just also in these high transaction scenarios, right? Picking on the cold storage one, where you're dealing with millions and millions of transactions. You do have to have an invoice strategy, because at the end of the day, somebody in accounts payable, accounts receivable is not going to look through a million lines to pay an invoice. So back to your original thing, it depends, but I think there are strategies. You almost do have to think of an invoice strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll give you another one came to mind that I think is interesting in going back to the concept and desire for consolidated invoicing. It's consolidating invoicing across channels. And so I'll give you a use case. There's a B2B sales motion with Amazon to sell a bucket of training for cybersecurity courses that gets sold as one thing. And you can think of that as a voucher and a bucket of money that can then be drawn down against as individual people, employees of Amazon, go to a self-service channel to register for the training, right? And so you have your direct sales channel, you have your self-service channel as individual registrants register against that voucher, right? Using a code, using a registration number so that it's all tied together. But then what the customer, in this case, the provider of the training, wants to do is provide a consolidated invoice to Amazon, aggregating all of the registrants and the information so it's very clear who registered and what the drawdown was and the balance and so on and so forth. So I'd say kind of taking the consolidated invoicing one step further, it's aggregating that across channels, right? Where you have the B2B sales motion along with, right, so more of a direct to consumer or direct to individual piece happening that has to inform that as well.
And Blake, if I can chime in there, what the platform provides is that ability when you're doing that drawdown, as you so eloquently put it, the bucket of money begins to start running out, is informing the sales rep of, okay, they're down to their last 20%, they're down to their last 10%. It may be a good idea to pick up the phone and call them as well. So the possibilities we have of just combining billing with what we can do, the art of the possible of the overall platform, and those types of notifications, the approvals involved in re-upping and selling them additional funds. I mean, you know, quite literally the possibilities are endless there in terms of how we can make that a better experience for the seller, for the end customer, and everybody in between.
Yep, absolutely.
And then
Thanks. I thought you might have something to say about that use case. I was gonna prompt you and you beat me to it.
Sorry, quick question. I was just wondering if we can quickly touch on like the customer type, right? So a couple of listeners I've been working with customers, it's like we have the resellers, the typical resellers, and then we have the in-between sellers, right? So they have their manufacturer and then they're distributing to other companies. So does it work with both? Do you think it works better with one or the other? Let's touch on customer types a little bit.
Yeah, I think it works with both in that manufacturing case. They could be direct sellers driving that sales motion. It could be partner sellers as well. And at the end of the day, a customer represented by a Salesforce account set up in Salesforce has to get invoiced for the transaction or transactions that are happening from the sale. And so we've seen it work in both cases, right? From a manufacturing perspective, both direct sales as well as partner sales. It really drives back to, I'd say, the account setup as well, and making sure that that just is all tied together, right? From the sale to the billing account that drives the recurring invoicing of the transaction.
Yeah, really the process that we see is very similar. You might just have different pricing, for example, for a reseller. So that could be a different price book. But yeah, good question. But it's very, very similar process-wise.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Blake. And at this point, we're going to pivot a little bit more and to put it back to our host. And we're going to talk through some of the common Salesforce billing and order questions that we hear again on the product side and on the implementation side.
Cool. So we'll round robin a little bit, both here in the room and also virtual. From one David to another, I'll ask you the first question here. So you've done CPQ implementations over a number of years. what does the order creation process look like from CPQ to billing? So going back to the, more the direct sales motions, so orders from one place from CPQ. Tell us more about that. Order creation, what goes into it, that kind of
Sure, really the standard vanilla order handoff. So to answer this, let's go back in the time machine just a little bit. So years ago, before Salesforce acquired SteelBrick, SteelBrick had just acquired a small invoicing package called Invoicing, right? So this was about 8 years ago, and this was acquired to sit alongside, their existing CPQ SteelBrick functionality. So when Salesforce bought SteelBrick, the Invoicing package was enhanced substantially for years and years, and it was really the early foundation of Salesforce billing as we know it. So why do I tell that story? And really I give the context is for a number of years, we thought of CPQ and billing, right? They were thought of as two separate products, but obviously, and they started as the same package, but now it's Revenue Cloud, right? Clearly it is, they're highly coupled. The order handoff is really seamless. The order and order lines, they're created on the CPQ side, and invoice lines on the billing side. So there is no integration, and the user doesn't really know any difference from CPQ to billing. So it's a really seamless handoff.
Excellent. Angela, we'll come to you next. So there's something called AI these days. I don't know if you are familiar with it. Yeah. So with Einstein and AI, and more specifically revenue intelligence, which is something that you see in the field a lot, how much data from everything we've been talking about today do you need to drive a good revenue intelligence strategy to get valuable insights?
Yeah, so great question. Just keeping in mind that AI runs on data and works best with historical and collaborative data. What I mean by collaborative data is really leveraging the Salesforce platform with multi-cloud. So, you can leverage your Sales Cloud, your Service Cloud, your Customer 360, and also pulling in the data that's could be transactional data, and then also anything that you would pull in from other systems, external systems. So one thing that I'd like to hit on as part of this is, really focusing on from a client side, is your data open or is it siloed? Right? And if it's siloed, is it structured in a way that the data does not talk to each other and it's not connected, right? So the one thing that is you're going through an implementation of AI or revenue intelligence is really start thinking about a data strategy. If you haven't thought about a data strategy, I would highly recommend that you reach out to your Salesforce partner, somebody like Argano, to take you through that, right? Because you will need that assistance to properly set up your data in order to get that, AI insights and the revenue intelligence to really work for you.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to always look at within CPQ. It's kind of weird, but it's the quote line object itself, not the quote line of the quote line editor, but the object, the amount of information, the calculated fields, the numbers, the quantities, the data, everything on there is, you could do an hour presentation just on that, just on what that provides for one line. So excellent. All right, Sean, coming to you next. So in your many years here at Salesforce, you have focused heavily on billing, basically your entire career here. So what kinds of transaction types within billing are you mainly talking to customers about? What has been significantly impactful for the customers you've been working with?
Yeah, so the three major ones that come to mind are Salesforce billing supports one time. They support subscription, as we've been talking about today, as well as usage. Now, just to put it into a simple analogy for something that everybody has in their pockets, let's talk about your iPhone, your cell phone. And I know billing happens in many different forms these days, but in the simplest form, going back a few years ago, that one-time charge would be the base charge for your phone. You're paying for everything up front. And then for the usage, or I'm sorry, your data plan for that phone, or your talk and text, that would be, you may have unlimited data. That may be a monthly subscription, a fixed amount that you're getting billed on a monthly basis for as much data as you can consume. But however, there's also an option for getting billed by the gigabyte, which may vary and may vary widely in a given period. So that would be akin to our usage-based billing, where you may get charged for 1 gigabyte 1 month, you may get charged for 10 gigabytes the other month. So the primary are the one-time, the subscription, and the usage. But if we pivot a bit and take a look at professional services, given a professional services engagement, we can support the billing on a time and expense basis. That can be manifested as either one-time or usage billing in our system. But we also have the ability to support milestone-based billing and have that set up as an invoice plan. So if a project bills 50% upfront, 50% after the project, or really anything in between, we can not only account for that, but also tie to a system managing those professional services engagements and account for any delays, any variances in that billing as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I think usage, you'd probably agree, has been the biggest kind of rise in adoption from our customers out of the different ones you talked about, one-time subscription and usage. I think that's exploded, and we're seeing usage in multiple industries. All right, Derek. So Argano has lots of experience with tough billing implementations. And this is a good one. What are a few of the self-service use cases that you've solved?
Yeah, so one that comes to mind is the scenario we talked a little bit about earlier, which, right, is that kind of warehouse scenario, right, where you have a customer. Let's pick on the Costco use case again, right, where Costco wants to have a consolidated invoice view of the world, but they're getting, Sean was talking about usage, right? Well, if you're talking about a company like Costco, the sheer amount of transaction volume or usage volume could be pretty enormous, right? So how do you handle presenting invoices if a customer says, I want to see my invoices in a self-service portal, for example? How do you handle the aggregation of giant invoices with tons and tons and tons of invoice lines? So this particular customer I'm thinking of, the challenge we have is two things. One is not only do they want to have a self-service solution to see the invoices, they want to have a self-service dispute them, right? So again, that's back to the invoice presentation. So how do you present back an invoice with millions and millions of lines and then still give that customer the ability to go through those invoice lines and figure out the lines that they may want to dispute, and then create a process behind it so they can actually go dispute those lines? That's a kind of a corner case, but it's an example of a pretty tough challenge that we're gonna have to figure out.
I can't go to Costco and not think about Argano anymore. Yeah, I go a lot, so I'm going to think about Argano quite a bit, which is good.
That could be our new tagline. Think Costco.
Think Costco, think Argano. Yeah.
Let's get a membership.
That'd be a
Let's get
good
a
one.
membership.
Absolutely, that'd be a good one. Blake, we'll come to you online here. So some of the things that you've been talking about during part of this presentation, I loved how you brought up field service and contact center and that kind of thing. Especially with rapid changes. Anything to add to that in terms of what your team has tackled? I think that when orders from anywhere, that's a big part of what people don't think about, is just the velocity of those orders and how to automate them in a manageable way. So anything to add to that topic?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought this up. This is a really, really good use case. And there's a couple things going on here. So there's an external B2C sales and ordering channel that feeds direct to billing for new customer signups. By the way, that could be any service. In this case, it was credit repair services. And so customers going to the web, browsing websites, and basically signing up for services and having those transactions go direct to billing on the platform. The other major channel in this use case is Service Center, right? So again, B2C demands a high volume call center in a lot of cases. Service Center agents, in this case, were taking inbound calls across both very rapid fire, high velocity, I want to cancel my service, right? So the vast majority of calls were billing related, and those billing related calls were mostly, hey, I want to cancel my service. I mean, these are, credit repair services at the end of the day. So you can imagine from a billing and dunning and collections standpoint, it's a focus, right? And needing to do that well and needing to do that efficiently. The other call center agents were more second and third line agents handling common requests such as chargeback handling. and payment method expiration and changes. But the service center especially was incredibly high volume, and those agents were already working through an agent desktop app, which is pretty common in the call center, embedded through Salesforce Service Cloud, by the way, using a set of Salesforce Lightning Web Components that were exposing data and processes from their legacy billing system. Happened to be Aria in this case, wanted to migrate that to Salesforce Billing on platform. And so there was a desire to keep their existing UI and user experience, knowing that that's very important for task times and the rapid fire, high velocity nature of working in a call center. But all of that had to be shifted to exposing data and processes from Salesforce Billing, as well as, again, going back to supporting that direct to billing channel for new customer signups, right? So at the end of the day, right, architecturally, this is exposing Salesforce Billing data and processes through a set of common interfaces to be used by both of those channels, and to essentially leverage the same interfaces for consistency, for correctness, for division of responsibilities, and to inject the right amount of automation adjacent to the Salesforce Billing engines and application, right? We don't want to customize that. We want to use the power of the Salesforce platform to expose what the engines want to do out of the box, and to make sure that it's very easy, intuitive, and efficient to do those things, especially in a call center environment. So let me take a pause there. Does that help sort of clarify the idea? Again, multi-channel, direct to consumer, right, for direct to billing customer signups, as well as this idea of a very high volume service center with agents having to essentially make changes to the back-end billing application and needing a common set of interfaces to expose both of those use cases.
Yeah, I think it does, and it puts it's a bit of a cherry on the top of the conversation of just about diversifying where revenue is coming from, right? Sales happening, not just direct sales, but also indirect sales, field service, e-commerce, coming from every direction, and being able to unify all of that.
Actually, just a quick little time check,
Yep.
Team. We've only got a few minutes, and we promised everybody
Yep, we can do the same.
Q&A from the group. So I know you guys have been jotting down and taking notes, and I know there's some great questions in the audience. We've only got 3 minutes, but we want to hear some of these tough questions that you guys have. Sean said he'll call on people if nobody asks.
Yeah. I like it.
I see Greg Fear.
There you go. I was gonna call on you,
Connor.
Connor.
Yeah, I have a question. So the self signups that you were just talking about, where someone can log in or go to a website and sign up, but they may be related to an overall like enterprise-wide contract that already exists with the company they work for. How have you guys seen like tracking that relationship between someone that signs up like through a website versus like a contract that was signed at the parent level, and like that relationship when it comes to renewal and basically subscription management and all that stuff?
Yep. Yeah, so this is going back to the concept of, at least as the customer describes it, it's a voucher, right? So there's a B2B sales motion to sell and price and set up the voucher. And the voucher can be thought of in terms of units, in terms of quantity of training courses. Right, I bought 10 cybersecurity training courses, or it could be thought of in terms of a bucket of money, right? The way we're thinking about that, the way we have thought about that, is really hanging that off of the account that then also gets reflected as a Salesforce contract, right? So pretty sort of what you'd expect as out of the box, going from the B2B sales motion. It may or may not be using CPQ. In this case, it isn't, but at the end of the day, it's a Salesforce contract that manages the subscriptions of what they purchased and the money that they have allocated. And then that self-service channel, which again goes through Today it's custom. Tomorrow, by the way, it's going to be B2C Commerce Cloud on Salesforce for tracking the individual signups where those employees of, say, Amazon, right, they're given a voucher registration code to link it to the specific voucher. And that is what will be ultimately creating standalone billing orders to tie that registration to the voucher and to kick off the drawdown and utilization process against the voucher. So there's a couple different ways we could actually solve this. There's more of, I'd say, a classic usage-based pattern that is also in play here to solve it that way, where you can think of it as like, well, this is really usage, right? Of like, as people register through the self-service channel, it's sort of like a usage concept, which could be drawdown as well. So there's a couple different ways to solve it, but kind of what I described there initially, Connor, is kind of the way we're thinking about it. So does that, hopefully that doesn't confuse and helps clarify at least a bit on the pieces and the solution details.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Great.
Any others from the room or the virtual room? Well, so first off, thank you for the incredible content. It's very, very timely, especially as we at Salesforce go into our second half of the year, and we've got to sell a lot of billing. So this is a good conversation to have. What's the best way to get in touch? What's the best next steps? Just in terms of keeping the relationship going between account executives, customers, solution engineers, and Argano.
Yeah, definitely. That could be, Derek, myself, Angelo. We're trying to continue to build relationships and help solve these problems together. So the way we look at it, we're very collaborative. We want to hear the problems that you guys are seeing in the field selling billing. And so we're more than glad to come in earlier and help with these cycles and contribute the most we can in the trenches with you guys. So yeah, reach out to anybody on the team.
Yep. And again, the theme here today, right? The whole purpose of this, or at least goal or objective in my mind, was really to help Salesforce. I mean, not that Salesforce needs help thinking about this, but more of non-traditional use cases, right? Think of us. If you find non-traditional use cases, you're just not sure there's a revenue cloud opportunity there, we're the partner, right? You should talk to us. And we've got countless examples where we've been able to help you guys identify those. So.
I love it. All right.
Great. Well, David, thank you for hosting.
Yeah, no,
Thank you,
likewise,
everybody, for
likewise.
joining, team.
All right.
Have
Well,
a
we're
great
going to hang up
afternoon.
here in the room. Thanks for joining virtually. And Summit, you can cancel the recording or stop.
Thank you all.